Let me get that for the record. This is Jen Leone. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at HPD. Probably a lot of people already know that. And I apologize, I am not on camera today. So welcome, thanks for coming to this presentation. You can see our agenda in the background. I'm not going to walk through it. Why are we doing how to ace the solar feasibility analysis? Well, we've had the solar where feasible mandate for about a year now, and we've learned a lot and made a few changes based on things we've learned and feedback from people we've worked with. And we just wanted to simplify the process and make it as effective as possible. So this presentation is a refresher on how to do the analysis and how to use it to help your projects and to do it quickly and to highlight all the changes that we've made in this new version. We'll also go more in depth on designing for solar in our next training, Solar for Designers, on October 21st. So if you still have questions on optimizing solar and the design of solar, stay tuned for that, and we'll share the link at the end. Remember, Solar One is always around to help. And finally, a reminder or notification that AIA credits are available if you self-report this session. I'm going to pass this over to Solar One. They can introduce themselves, and thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jen. So I want to start this off with introducing everyone. So I'll introduce myself and Kate, but I'm also going to launch a little audience poll to see who you all are. Since this is a webinar, we can't actually see faces, but it would be great to learn. For one thing, as Jen said, we've been doing this for a year. So some of you might be really well versed in the solar where feasible process now, and others this might be the first time. So take a look and introduce yourselves. And if anyone wants to introduce yourself in the chat as well, that would be nice. So as I said, my name is Annika Wister-Jones. I'm the Affordable Solar Director at Solar One. Kate, why don't you introduce yourself now too, so we get it all out of the way.
Correct. Hi, I'm Kate Sullivan, and I am a program manager with Solar One.
So we've both been working with all sorts of different HPD financed buildings, preservation, new construction projects, even some asset management buildings. And so it's really exciting to see all the different facets of the city financed world. So yeah, let's see, we've got most people having responded to the poll. Looks like the vast majority of people, it's your first time in these doing this webinar, so that's really great to know. We'll try to go into a little bit more detail, but please know that we've got a lot of other resources if you still have questions after this presentation. It looks like a lot of people have some familiarity with solar, but not very many people are extremely familiar, so that's good. We're glad to help teach with that. And it looks like most people in terms of buildings are working with new construction buildings, but there's actually a pretty good distribution there. And it looks like a lot of you are architects or engineers, which means that I would love to plug again the next workshop that we're doing next week, in 2 weeks on the 21st, that's specifically about designing for solar and keeping solar in mind as you're doing the designs. So I'm going to close the poll now. I'll share the results briefly, but then go through the basics of solar technology. So I know that if anyone's on their phone, you won't be able to see this until I close the poll. So I'll stop sharing it now. Okay, so for those of you who have no familiarity with solar, this is a very extremely short crash course on solar. And if you want more, we have lots of resources on the Solar Where Feasible website. But basically, solar power is created from the sun Energy from the sun is turned into electricity that we use in our homes. So that electricity goes through a box called an inverter, which converts it from DC to AC energy. And then it's either used immediately on site or it's sold back to the grid at like a 1-for-1 rate. So often you'll generate a lot of energy during the day and gain a lot of solar credits. That's what they're called. And then at night, when the sun isn't shining, so you're not producing any power, you use those credits. And over time, most of the time, you can zero out a bill with the solar by doing that. So a couple really basic pieces of information about technology. Solar panels are incredibly long lasting and durable. They have, all solar panels have a 25-year warranty, which means that if they don't produce as much power as they're supposed to in year 24, the manufacturer will give you a new panel. So you can really count on that, which is great. And they're also very low maintenance. There's no moving parts. We usually recommend that someone check the panels, maybe once a year or twice a year or something to make sure nothing's gone wrong. But there's no required maintenance. And you can monitor their production online with a web app. So it's very simple. They do require direct sunlight. So the main thing we look for when we're doing a viability screening is whether there's shading. In New York City, it's usually from other buildings or from bulkheads or other pieces of equipment on the roof. And they are grid connected, which is great because it means that you can do that selling the energy to the grid and then using it at night. But it also means that there's no backup power in a blackout unless you attach batteries. And right now in New York City, batteries are essentially impossible in terms of permitting and financial considerations. So that's not an option. There are 3 main types of solar installations on flat roofs in the city. The most common is a ballasted array. This is where they're just laid out on the roof and they're held down, as you can see, with cinder blocks. So, or something akin to that. So there's no or very few roof penetrations, and it's very cheap and simple to install for the solar installers. So if you have the roof space for it, we usually recommend the ballasted array. And as you will be able to see in the feasibility tool, we default to that most of the time. There is also a mechanically attached array. So that sometimes is called a shed array because you can see it looks kind of like a shed over top of the roof. It allows you to fit more solar panels in a smaller amount of space. So for small roofs, it's often a good option, or if you really want to boost the production. It's a little bit more expensive because obviously it requires a little bit more engineering and construction, but not by much. So it can often be a really good option. And then a canopy array is really just another form of a mechanically attached array, but it's where it's raised 9 to 12 feet in the air. And it means that you can put pretty much anything underneath it. You can walk underneath it. You could put a roof deck underneath it. You could put mechanical equipment underneath it, and it allows for a lot more movement. Canopy arrays are much more expensive, but often they're the best option if you have multiple uses of the roof or a very space constrained roof. It can be very useful. So let's go into, I think probably most of you know about the Climate Mobilization Act by now, but part of that is Local Law 92 and 94, which require that all new roofs have either a green roof or solar installed in every reasonable space. But you should know that until November 2024, affordable housing is exempt if it's financially infeasible. So that's where the solar where feasible mandate comes in. Oh, and I should note that new roof applies to alterations where, quote, the entire existing roof deck or assembly is being replaced. To my knowledge, that's very rare that that happens, but you should know that that's the official rule. So the solar where feasible mandate is this alternate compliance pathway, which basically is a way to encourage solar in every place where it's really beneficial for the buildings, but doesn't require solar in places where it just doesn't make sense. So it saves buildings on operating expenses down the line. It reduces the city subsidy. And the work that we do at Solar One with HPD provides free technical resources to be able to find out where the systems are financially beneficial and where they're not. So a little bit about Here Comes Solar. We're part of the nonprofit Solar One, and we do technical assistance for solar, specifically to historically high barrier sectors, and we work a lot with affordable housing. So everything from the initial viability assessment to this kind of training to procurement, selecting a solar installer, to even just helping with making sure that the installation happens without a hitch. That's all that we do. And NYSERDA is funding a partnership between HPD and Solar One to kick off the solar where feasible mandate. So that's where we come in.
Great. So next, we'll go through the solar feasibility analysis itself, which is not only a tool that's going to help determine if solar is required for your building, but can really be used to help you figure out the best way to go solar and achieve your goals for your building. So, as I mentioned, we designed this tool in partnership with HPD to be really easy to use for the applicant and building owners at any level of familiarity with solar. And so, it provides a realistic idea of the economics and feasibility of solar based on the inputs that you put in. And so we're going to take you through each part of the analysis and highlight a couple updates that we made to make it more streamlined and easier to use. So first, the applicant, which is usually the building owner or energy consultant, is required to submit the analysis. So there's 3 input pages, and there's one optional input page we'll talk about later, and then a results page, which gets automatically generated. And once you submit it, Solar One does a review, and then HPD issues a solar approval form. And for those of you who've done this before, previously, you might know that you had to submit a solar approval form with your analysis. Now that form gets automatically generated. So all you have to worry about is the solar feasibility analysis, and HPD will provide the necessary forms. And keep in mind that the main goal of this is to get to the results page. So this page we'll spend a little bit of time on later, but that's going to really help you understand the costs and the savings and the feasibility of your project. So the first page we wanted to highlight is the first tabs of the analysis, and these are the instructions and assumptions pages. And this is just a really helpful resource for instructions, but also it highlights all the assumptions that we're using to make this analysis work. And so you can go back to this to learn about what numbers you're putting in and how they impact the results, or if you want to use it to compare some of the assumptions that the tool is using with bids. We really encourage you to look through these pages to learn a lot about solar. So the second tab is the real meat of the analysis. This is a new page, and it captures all the information about your project. And so every field is required because these are the fields that are going to carry through to all the other forms, including the HPD solar approval form. We just ask you fill out all the fields so that we can get the best, most accurate form. Just to highlight a few things, the number of buildings on this page is the total number of buildings, not just the ones going solar. So we have a field for total number of buildings in the project, and then the number of buildings that are going solar. And if you have a multi-building project, reach out to us for support, because there might be a couple of different ways that we can fill it out. And so we can help you think through the best way to submit it. At the bottom of this page, you'll see the section for agency approvals. And the first question is asking, is the project proposing solar? And so that answer should be based off of the results of the analysis. And the drop-down menu will help you determine the correct reasoning for why you are or are not going solar. And then the second field is about whether or not you need a DOB, local law 9294 exemption letter. So this is applicable to new construction projects, and you would need it either if your project can't support 4 kilowatts of solar or is not financially feasible. And again, the drop-down options will help you determine which one to pick. So the next input page is where all the information about your building itself goes. And this is these are the inputs that are going to generate the feasibility results. So it's really important to fill out every single field on this page. You'll notice the first 3 fields get auto-filled from the first tab. And then the rest of the fields in blue are the ones that you need to fill in. And if you're not sure about something, you can either look in the assumptions and instructions tab, or you can reach out to Solar One for help if you have a question about one of the fields. The next, one of the big sections in this tab is about the solar tax credits. And so a few notes about the tax incentives. So the solar tax credit is the federal solar tax credit, and it can be taken if the owner has federal tax liability, or it can be taken if it's a low-income housing tax credit project or LIHTC deal, where the tax credit investor could take the tax credit. And if the building owner is eligible for the solar tax credit, they're also likely eligible for accelerated depreciation. So you can put yes for both of those. If it's a LIHTC project, you can indicate whether it's 4% or 9%. And in our experience, we typically see solar is not part of the eligible basis for 9% deals, but for 4% deals, it is often part of the eligible basis, and that can have a really positive impact on the solar economics. So just make sure you fill out those fields correctly. And then finally, the New York City solar property tax abatement can also be a huge help for project economics. So if the building pays any property taxes at all, you can mark yes for that one. This next section at the bottom is used to determine the metering configuration of your building, and then thus the value of solar. And the metering and the amount of electricity that your building uses can really have a major impact on the value of solar. And so it's important to have a good estimate of the owner paid utility costs, and then have accurate responses to whether it's master metered or an elevator building. And if you don't know the electricity costs, you can use the current M&O standards, which currently I believe is 140 a room a year. And this chart at the bottom shows you how the type of building impacts the utility tariff, and then, or determines the utility tariff, and then sort of the typical value of solar associated with those utility tariffs. And you don't have to commit this to memory or anything, but it's just to indicate how these inputs are going to impact how your solar project economics work out. So the next page is, this is at the bottom of the building inputs page is a button you can see in the upper left-hand corner that says advanced inputs. So if you click this, it's going to open up a new tab called the advanced inputs tab. This is completely optional, and it can be used if you already have a solar design, or maybe you're the solar or energy consultant and you have more detailed information about the project. And so what's important to know about this page is that any field that you input in this page is going to override the default assumptions for that field without changing any other assumptions. So only fill in the fields on this page you need. And we really recommend only using this page if you're really confident in the changes you're making. And then at any time, if you press clear advanced inputs, it'll erase this page and just go back to the default assumptions. So you can use it to test it out if you want, but you can always erase it if you want to just revert to the previous assumptions. This is the final required page, inputs page. So this is the roof layout page, and this is where you should include any images that show the roof layout or plan, and indicating either usable roof area or showing the solar installation if you have one planned. And it's very important, especially for preservation projects, to give us an updated roof plan of what the roof is going to look like, so that we really get a sense of If there are new mechanicals or different locations of bulkheads, we can really see where the roof area, where there's area available for solar. And the comment section on this page is, for you to write a short summary explaining your design or your sort of reasoning for the usable roof area. So things like, there's going to be a raised canopy here to locate solar over the HVAC or over a roof deck, or there's going to be a green roof over here or recreation space. It's really kind of a narrative section, but can help explain what you're thinking. So just a quick note on finding usable roof area for solar. So first of all, if a project already has a solar design, you can use those calculations, though you might want to compare just to see if the usable roof area might allow for a bigger solar design. The local law 9294 defines usable roof area or sustainable roofing zone as any contiguous area on the roof that is 200 square feet or greater. That's not obstructed by rooftop structures or mechanicals, and not used for fire pathways and not used as recreation space. So to demonstrate this area, you can just simply sketch boxes over your roof plan. And just note that if you're doing a canopy system, that's going to have a different roof area because it can be raised over fire paths. If it's early enough in the design, there's still time to make changes that could really significantly impact the outcome of the solar design. And once you have the areas drawn out, add them all together, and that's the number you're going to use for the estimated usable roof area for solar on the building inputs page. And, we mentioned fire paths, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but very briefly, sort of rules of thumb for fire paths are, buildings need a 6-foot fire path on each street facing side of a building that runs front to back of the building and side to side. And all roof exits like bulkhead doors and fire escapes have to connect to a fire path. And, when possible, we recommend putting the fire path along the perimeter of the building so that it leaves unobstructed space to allow for solar. And a quick tip, if you, if you're not an architect or you're doing this yourself as a building owner, for existing buildings, you can use Google Maps to get the usable roof area. And so if you're looking in satellite view and you right click, you can click measure distance and then click out the shape that you want to measure, usually, kind of accounting for fire paths and bulkheads, and then close the shape and it'll give you the total area. So that's the number you can use for the input. So finally, we get to the results tab, and this is really going to show you, the economic feasibility of your project. And as you change inputs, the results automatically update. So you can really use this tool to experiment and explore how different inputs will change the economics of your project. And just know that there's a new button at the bottom right-hand corner of this page to click, and it'll take you directly where you can upload the feasibility analysis. So hopefully that'll save you a little bit of time. And these results can really be used to understand what your project will cost and what it will save you. So, things to look at are the year 1 utility bill savings. That's going to be, subtracted from your project's M&O costs and used by HPD in underwriting. The upfront cost estimate is what you can look at for using a project budget. And then the payback period is really the critical piece of information that we use to determine if solar is required. So if it's 10 years or less, it's feasible and required. If it's over 10 years, but still provides good solar savings, solar may still be recommended, though it's not required. All right, and now I'm going to pass it over to Annika to talk about the analysis in practice.
Yeah, and I want to take a minute to answer some of these questions that are coming in as well. There's some great questions about solar in general in the city. Alfredo asked, why can't backup batteries be installed if an owner requests it? Right now, FDNY has some pretty restrictive requirements for batteries that essentially makes it impossible for almost all buildings in New York City to install batteries. There's a few exceptions, but in most cases, it's just not allowed. Dennis asked if we're doing a rehab with a new roof down to the deck, but the existing deck will remain, will solar or green roof be required? Our interpretation of that is that it's not required unless you pull up the existing deck and install a brand new deck. Then you aren't subject to local law 9294. The examples that we've heard are things like if you're installing a penthouse or if you're adding another floor or something like that, then local law 9294 is triggered. Speaking of penthouses, German asked, can solar be positioned on the top of bulkheads? Absolutely, that's definitely possible. But as you can imagine, bulkheads are relatively small spaces, so it's a little bit more expensive. So if you can just put it straight on the roof, it's much better to do that. And then Raquel asked, are elevator and stair bulkheads included in the roof area? And they're not. That's the big reason why you can't just use the building square footage area for the usable roof area for solar, because you obviously can't put solar in like every single area around the bulkhead and mechanical areas and stuff. So you should use what Kate just showed for how to determine the shapes. Okay. So yeah, here, so you can look at the roof area and just cut out the bulkheads and fire paths. Okay, so let's talk about the solar feasibility analysis in practice. And if other questions come up, we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer general questions. And we even have a little time afterwards. So if you have anything more specific, we're happy to stay on and answer more specific questions after the workshop as well. But I want to go into a couple specifics for this. First of all, let's talk about things that are generally favorable for solar as you're looking at your building and wondering, like, is this a good idea for solar? The things that you want to look for are not having a lot of shading. So you can see this roof is bright and sunny. Large available roof areas, so you can put a lot of solar panels without having to break them up into small clusters. And lower buildings are generally better, but that's not it's not a requirement. It's just a nice to have. New roofs are important. So since solar panels have a warranty of 25 years, it means you probably don't want to install them on a roof that's 10 years or older, because then you'll have to uninstall the solar panels, put the new roof on, and when you have to replace the roof and then put the solar panels back on. So that just adds an extra expense. So we usually recommend installing solar on roofs that are 5 or so years or younger. And then having the obstructions clustered more or less in one place, and preferably in the north. So this building is facing south, so you can see the little north compass arrow in the bottom right. So the big tower there is in the north, and that's exactly where you'd want it. So let's look at some example buildings. So this is a nonprofit walk-up building. As a nonprofit, it's not eligible for tax credits. And they want to install a 10 kilowatt system on their roof to offset their common area costs. So you can see they filled in the tool with no for all of the tax credits. And what that looks like is a payback period of 13 years and a lifetime net savings of $47,000 after the system has paid for itself. So it's an okay system. We would usually recommend this, but not require it. However, next slide. If they are eligible for the property tax abatement, which happens sometimes if there's a commercial space and the building owner has to pay property taxes for the commercial space, then they get that 20% property tax abatement that reduces the payback period to 11 years, increases the lifetime net savings, and decreases the cost after incentives and tax abatements. So that's a win. So that's good to know what effect the property tax abatement has. So let's look at another scenario for this nonprofit. What if they want to install a larger system? So before they were looking at a 10 kilowatt system, but if they did a 24 kilowatt system, maybe with a planar array, and then they wanted to distribute some of the energy to their tenants. With that, the payback period would go down even further. The cost per watt goes down as well because larger systems have better economies of scale. And so the total cost might go up because it's a much larger system, but the lifetime net savings goes up much more. And there's benefits for the residents as well. So that makes a big difference. And this is kind of an interesting thing. So you've got the 24 kilowatt system, maybe with a planar array, and then they're looking at it, they think maybe if we would do a canopy array, we could fit even more solar on the roof, it could be even better. So they switched to a canopy array, and now it's a 28 kilowatt system. But because canopies are so much more expensive than planar arrays, this is actually probably not a great idea because it increases the cost, it increases the cost per watt, and it increases the lifetime net savings a little bit, but not a ton. And so I would probably recommend for this building to go with the planar array with 24 kilowatts than the canopy array and 28 kilowatts. So now let's look at a new construction nonprofit building. This would be a 60-unit new elevator building. They're looking at a 32 kilowatt system. And as a nonprofit, of course, they're not eligible for tax credits. So they'd fill out the screening tool, and you can see their new construction. Because it's a 32 kilowatt system, the cost per watt is relatively low. Their payback period is 10 years, even though they can't take any tax credits. So this is a great system, and we would absolutely recommend this. Large buildings with higher loads, especially elevator buildings, often have a utility tariff with a lower value of solar, but because they're so much larger, the economies of scale offset that, and it can be a really good project. So now if they apply for and get the 9% LIHTC, we don't recommend including solar in the LIHTC basis because there's usually not enough, but the LIHTC investor can also take the solar tax credit. And so that means that the solar tax credit and the accelerated depreciation can be monetized for the project as well. So that reduces the payback period even further to 5 years, which obviously increases the lifetime net savings. And yeah, I already said that. If this building instead were a 100-foot elevator building, so for a much taller building, then it would make the cost of the system a little bit higher, but not a ton. It would increase the cost per watt, but the payback period in this case doesn't actually change in terms of number of years. So this is just to say that some things like the height of the building can affect the design, but probably not a lot. So often tall buildings are still great candidates. And if instead this building decided to do the 4% or was able to get the 4% LIHTC program, then that is like the best case scenario because there's unlimited basis, and so you could include solar in the LIHTC basis. So you could take the low-income housing tax credits on the solar. So that reduces the payback period to 3 years and increases the lifetime net savings. I think that the main point here is that the cost after all of the incentives is negative. This is like only a positive thing to do. So this is a fantastic project. And if this same building were a master metered building, then that means that the usage is much higher because it's the whole building's usage. So they could fit, they could use a much larger PV system. So if you double the system size, that reduces the cost per watt. And if they can take the community credit, which may or may not be possible in the future, but right now there's an incentive for master meter buildings that also increases the value of solar. And so that would make a master meter building like this a slam dunk. So now let's look at an HDFC co-op. So for these buildings, they've got shareholders inside the cooperative. So if we're just looking at the co-op as an entity, we don't usually look at the tax credits. So if you have a 12 kilowatt system for a 40 unit building, the payback period would be 17 years because the building itself can't take any of the tax credits. However, in an HDFC co-op, it's made up of shareholders. So it's often more useful to look at this from the perspective of the shareholders and say, okay, well, the co-op may not be able to take this, but the shareholders can take both a federal tax credit and a state tax credit on their personal income taxes. And so with that in mind, the payback period goes down to 9 years, and the costs, the lifetime net savings and cost after incentives are much better. I should say though that for now, the shareholders can only take this if they pay income taxes of their own. So if there are people in the building who don't pay income taxes, they can't take the tax credit. So this one is more of an estimate than a hard and fast number. So let's look at an HDFC co-op that's in a historic district. So with this, you've got the same type of building, but they are in a historic district. So this means, first of all, if you could go back to the picture for a second, Kate, it means that the solar can't be visible from the road. So you have to install solar in a way like this, where it's below the parapet wall or set back enough that you can't see it if it's in a landmark district. But it also means that the building and residents are eligible for a historic tax credit, which is an additional 20% of the cost of the system. So with that, the payback period goes down even further to 7 years. And the lifetime net savings is 50,000. So that's significantly more than their initial cost. So the historic tax credit is only for owner occupied buildings, so co-ops and condos, if they're in a historic or landmark district and they are in a qualifying census tract. So some last tips about using the feasibility analysis. Again, it's really important to fill in all the fields, especially on the building inputs tab, because those create the equations that lead to the analysis. But we totally recommend exploring the different inputs that you can use to see what would happen if this building were a little bit taller. Sometimes you have a system size that's like 29.5, like maybe 29.5 kilowatts. If I just make that 31 kilowatts, maybe the price would show up as lower. And so you can check out the different outputs for that. And we definitely recommend making your case for what you're suggesting. If you're submitting the feasibility analysis, in the narrative sections, there's space on the project information page and on the roof layout page. We'll read that and come back to you with questions and comments. And definitely read the comments and links in the document. So most of the cells have little red triangles on them where you can hover on them and get explanation for how to use that. And of course, if you have any questions as you're going through it, you can reach out to us at affordable@solarone.org. We can answer questions, or we could just do the feasibility analysis for you if you're having trouble. So we can help out in any way possible. And then just want to go over the factors that impact the feasibility analysis. So the property tax abatement reduces the post-incentive cost, including the tenants can give you a larger system. And so with a CANOPY design, the LIHTC projects can give you extra tax credits, and building height can increase the cost a little bit. Master metering will impact the value of solar, but it also allows you to increase the system size. And whether it's an owner occupied building, so a co-op or a condo, it means that you could take the state solar tax credit and possibly the historic tax credit as well. Okay, looks like we have one other question here, but we've got plenty of time for questions later on. We're going to go over the review, how we review this really quickly. But as we go, if you have other questions about the feasibility analysis in general or solar, we can answer those questions at the end. Scout asked, if solar doesn't fill all feasible space, will green spaces be required in those spaces? For market rate buildings, yes. But for HPD finance buildings with the solar where feasible mandate, then it really depends on whether it's cost feasible. So that's the determination, not how the specific space is. Go ahead, Kate. Let's talk about the review.
So yeah, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly just to see how this fits into the full review process and the HPD process. So just to review, the solar feasibility analysis is completed by the applicant, probably many of you, submitted. 3 pages are required plus the results page, and Solar One can help with this step. Solar One does the review, and that takes about 2 weeks. And often Solar One will email you if we have questions or if something isn't clear to us. So there might be some back and forth before we finalize our review. Then we send our review and the analysis to HPD, and they will generate the solar approval form, either approving the solar or approving an exemption. And again, that's solar is required for projects with a 10-year or less payback period, and then often recommended if it's over 10 years but still cost effective. And then after HPD issues the review, HPD can underwrite to the project savings. And this is just a sort of overview of the rubric that HPD is using to determine whether or not to approve the project. So we talked about this, but 10 years or less payback period, solar is required. Projects 11 to 15 years, it's often recommended or strongly recommended, depending on what other co-benefits it might bring or the impact on the subsidy or other reasons. Maybe it's just like a really great design, even if it's slightly over 10 years. Projects over 15 years are often either not recommended or suggested some kind of redesign, and that's again where the tool can come in really handy to help you figure out how might that project be redesigned or reconfigured to be more feasible and financially beneficial. And then projects that are seeking the DOB exemption letter, HPD will either approve the exemption if it can't accommodate a 4 kilowatt system, or if it can't meet the 10-year payback, it'll either approve the exemption or it might recommend a redesign if there's an easy way to make that more feasible. And just kind of a brief timeline as you're thinking about solar. So starting on the left, you're hopefully designing with solar in mind and thinking about the factors that will make the project feasible for solar. Then the applicant will submit the solar feasibility analysis. And then for HPD projects, you can either run an RFP for an installer, or Solar One does bulk RFPs on a quarterly basis, so we can really help get good pricing and really competitive pricing for projects if we combine them. So we can support you through that process if needed. And just to keep in mind, if your design changes significantly before closing, but after you've submitted your initial feasibility analysis, maybe you know, your roof changes and you suddenly now have space for solar, whereas before you didn't, or maybe the opposite is true, now you can no longer install solar. We ask you that you resubmit the feasibility analysis to just make sure that we have on record sort of the final determination. Then you get to loan closing, which is, I know, a very exciting time in a project, and hopefully install solar if it's planned. If solar isn't planned, but perhaps there's contingency that becomes available in the project budget, or you decide after construction you want to go solar, you can always contact Solar One to help figure out if if there's a cost-effective solar system that can be installed. And then you get to realize the savings from solar for 25 years and beyond. All right. So I think in summary, and then we're going to leave the rest of it. We have about 10 minutes left for questions and examples, and happy to talk through anything. But just some kind of key takeaways. The solar feasibility analysis has to include, those the project information and the building information pages with the results page generated, and make sure you fill out every single field in those pages so we don't have to do a ton of, hopefully not a ton of back and forth, because everything is very clear. But always reach out if you need support. And then a roof plan is required for each building, or showing us where either the roof space is or the solar design if you have one. Just a reminder that you no longer need to send us the pre-filled solar approval form the way we used to do it. Now that's going to be automatically created on the back end. So all you have to worry about is the solar feasibility analysis pages. And just keep in mind the review can take about 2 weeks. And you usually will hear from Solar One in that time if there's any questions. Otherwise, we'll turn it around and get you your approval form. HPD is going to send you the approval form, and this is a required item for the EGC pre-build process, or gets included in the IP&A. And just to reiterate, projects with 10-year payback or less are considered feasible and required, and those with 11 to 15-year paybacks and other benefits are often recommended, included with HPD permission. And the solar feasibility analysis, is a really helpful tool to help you design the best project for solar. And Solar One can always provide free technical assistance throughout the process. All right, so thank you, everyone. And I think we'll open up the floor for a little questions and answers.
Hey, one of the questions that came in from Raquel was, how would blue roofs be considered in the calculation? Part of the mechanical systems, i.e. stormwater management. So are these areas excluded also? Can you answer that?
Yeah, sorry, did you say Kate?
Yes.
There's a garbage truck behind me. Yeah, so our understanding is that blue roofs solar can be installed over blue roofs. So that does not need to be excluded from the usable roof area.
But in general, if there are mechanical systems on the roof, then that does count as some other occupied space, and so solar usually goes around the other things that are already on the roof. Douglas said, you mentioned a tab for the number of buildings, but can you please clarify for HPD clusters, does one submit a form for each building or a single form for all? Do you want to answer that as well?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the project. Our goal is to work with you to figure out what the best way to do it. So if you have maybe just 2 buildings, it's probably easier just to submit one form for each project. If you have, a portfolio of 10 buildings in a project, we would work to help you figure out, maybe we'd put all the buildings that are going solar on one form and those that are not on another, and we can help you figure out how to sort of consolidate or combine buildings onto one form. And we have a form that we can use we want to make sure, even if we combine buildings under the same form, that we indicate somewhere, you know, what each building's payback would be, so that it's very clear when the project manager is looking at it, you know, which buildings are exempt or which buildings are going solar. So we prefer that you just contact us, and we'll help you figure out, before you sort of go too far down the road, what the best way to divvy up those buildings is.
And I want to say that this is kind of the classic example of the iterative process. When we first started out last year, we said you have to include one form for every single building. And then there were a number of very unfortunate people who had to fill in one form for 30 buildings. And we realized that the process had to change. So we're working on making it more smooth and streamlined, so that portfolios can go through this process as easily as single buildings. Joseph asked, does HPD require the solar feasibility to be submitted if a building is planning to install solar regardless?
Yeah, so even if the building's installing solar, we still want to see the sort of the project, because so that HPD can approve it and give you your form. So we do ask that you submit it, but you can put, just the design as planned and sort of share, why it's a good project on the form.
And Dennis asked, is the solar feasibility analysis and Solar One's assistance available or required on projects that HPD is not involved with the construction lending? So I can answer that kind of, it's half and half. The feasibility analysis is not required if HPD is not involved with the lending, but Solar One's technical assistance is available to any affordable housing free of charge. And the feasibility analysis tool should work for any building in New York City, has some New York City specific assumptions. So it doesn't work as well outside of the Con Edison territory. But it should work for pretty much any building that you're working with. And so you can use that whenever.
And then, Annika, we have a question in the Q&A chat. In market rate buildings of 60 units, what are you seeing solar being used for functionally? Is it selling back to utilities, lighting up hallways and public spaces, or other uses?
Yeah, so most buildings, most multifamily buildings use solar for the common areas. If you think about it, for like single family homes, you've got one roof and one family under the roof, and the solar covers the family's entire usage. In New York, we have still one roof, but then lots of families stacked up on top of each other underneath it. And so it's very rare that the solar on the roof will provide 100% of the whole building's electricity. So most of the time, what multifamily buildings do is use solar for, the hallway lighting, the, electrical, laundry room, elevator, that sort of thing. Sometimes you can also distribute it to the residents. And you can do that a couple of different ways. You could just give it to the residents as a benefit, or you could give it to the residents and then charge a certain amount, maybe 50% of the savings or something, and have that be an additional revenue stream. I am cutting out. Did that sound, did you guys understand that? Should Kate repeat it?
I thought I was having connectivity issues, so I guess, oh, okay. Please repeat. So, I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear what you're saying, Annika, but I think she was describing, the two kind of methods to use either solar to just offset the common area account. So like you're suggesting, lighting of hallways, public spaces, common areas, and then, any excess at any point goes to the grid, and then you get a credit on your account. So you're not necessarily selling it for, for cash to the utility, but to Con Ed, but you are getting credit for any extra solar produced. And then the other method is distributing energy to different accounts. And that one's sort of up in the air. Right now, it's made possible by a particular sort of like incentive or credit. If that credit is renewed and continues, that's a way to distribute energy or some of the solar production to either on-site to tenants in your building or potentially off-site to other off-takers. Did that capture what you were saying, Annika?
Yes, thank you.
Great. And the next question is from Sean. What is the thinking behind the tall and very tall building adders, both height thresholds and dollar per watt? Is the value captured anywhere for roofs high enough to not require FDNY ladder access 6-foot zones? I can speak to the second one and then I'll send it to Annika to the first one. I believe, and Annika jump in if I say this wrong, but I believe it's over 100 feet. The buildings do not have to do the same stringent fire paths that are required that we were describing.
Correct. And so there's a little bit of a back and forth there. So for tall buildings, and I was just looking it up to make sure that we have exactly the right numbers. It's all of this information is in the instructions and assumptions page of the feasibility analysis. And basically the thinking behind it is that taller buildings on kind of a linear scale get a little bit more expensive each floor. So we have a tall building threshold, which is 70 feet. That doesn't mean that a building is 69 feet will necessarily be cheaper than a building that's 70 feet, just that we want to capture that in some way. And then very tall buildings, our threshold is 150 feet. And we add about 20 cents per watt for each of those. So a building that is 70 feet will have an additional 20 cents per watt added to the price. And then a building that's 150 feet will have an additional 40 cents per watt from like the base price that's calculated from the system size. And often, solar system pricing is kind of a secret sauce for each of the installers. So this is a rule of thumb, kind of rough measurement of what we expect you to see. But we also try to keep it relatively conservative within the bounds of what we have seen throughout the city.
So I think we're just about at time, and like Annika said, we can stay around for a couple of minutes if folks have any additional questions or want to ask any more specifics. But thank you all so much for coming, and we really encourage you to contact us with any questions. Our email's on the slide, and there's tons of resources on the HPD website and the Solar Where Feasible landing page. So we really encourage you to explore those resources, and hopefully they can help you, with this tool and optimize your project for solar. And we look forward to seeing all your analyses.
And I just dropped the link for the next webinar on the 21st in the chat. So if you haven't already signed up for that, there are a lot of really great questions today that had to do with solar design. So it sounds like the next webinar will be perfect for that. So thanks everyone. It was great to see you and talk to you about this. And thanks for all the really good questions. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.